When my father died, the last thing he left me was silence. No will read aloud in a wood-paneled office, no tearful phone calls from relatives. No dramatic final words. Just a Tuesday morning in November and a police officer standing at my front door telling me there had been an accident on Route 9. Head-on collision. The other driver walked away. My father did not. I was 31 years old, and for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely untethered. My mother had passed when I was 12, so my father had been the whole of it, the only person who knew me before I became whoever I thought I was. His name was Thomas. He built things for a living, custom homes mostly, and he had hands that looked like they belonged to someone twice his size. He coached my little league team badly and made the world's worst chili and laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them. He was 63 years old and had never spent a night in a hospital, and now he was gone. 4 months passed. I went back to work. I went to the gym. I called my uncle on Sundays because that's what you do when family is all you have left. Then a man named Hargrove called me on a Wednesday afternoon in March. I didn't recognize the number. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Is this Daniel?" the voice asked. Older, careful, the kind of voice that measures every syllable. I said yes. "My name is Frank Hargrove. I'm a licensed private investigator based out of Columbus. Your father hired me approximately 8 months before he passed. I've been trying to figure out the right time to contact you." He paused. "There may not be a right time for something like this." I set down my coffee. "What do you mean he hired you?" "I mean exactly that. He retained my services, paid in full, and left very specific instructions. One of those instructions was that if anything happened to him before he could reach you himself, I was to contact you directly, and that I was to do it privately." Another pause, this one longer. He was very clear about that word. Privately. My hand had gone cold against the phone. Privately from who? Hargrove said he'd rather not get into that over the phone. He said he had something to send me. A box. Small, combination lock. The 4-digit code was my mother's birthday. He said my father wanted me to go through it alone before I talked to anyone. I asked why. He said, "Because the people you'd want to tell are the people you can't trust yet." The box arrived 2 days later in a plain brown mailer with no return address. It sat on my kitchen counter for 3 hours before I touched it. My girlfriend Claire called twice that evening. I let both calls go. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I'd call her back later. I didn't call her back. At 11:15, I turned the combination to 0417 April 17th, the day my mother was born, and opened the box. Inside was a notebook. Black cover, college ruled, maybe 60 pages. My father's handwriting, which I would know anywhere, capital letters slightly too large, the number 7 always crossed, every sentence starting just a little too far from the left margin, like he was always leaving himself room to back up. I sat down on the kitchen floor and I read. My father had started keeping the notebook 14 months before he died. The first entry was dated almost a year and a half ago, and it started with a single line at the top of the page. "I think Ray has been stealing from us, and I need to be sure before I say anything. Ray is my uncle. My father's younger brother by 4 years. He had been the CFO of my father's construction company Callaway, built for 11 years. He was the man I had been calling every Sunday for the past 4 months. He brought a ham to the funeral. He cried at the graveside. Or did something close enough to crying that I never questioned it. I kept reading. My father had noticed irregularities in the company accounts almost 2 years before he died. Small things at first. A vendor he didn't recognize on the payroll. A materials invoice that didn't match any job site. He had assumed clerical errors. He had assumed his bookkeeper had made a mistake. Then the mistakes kept happening in the same direction, money flowing out, never in, and he started paying closer attention. He documented everything. He was meticulous in a way I had never seen from him. Not the man who kept grocery lists in his head and forgot every dentist appointment he ever made. But this was different. This was a man who understood that what he was writing down might be the only record that something wrong had happened. Ray had set up 3 shell companies over the course of 5 years. My father found the paperwork trail buried inside contracts that Ray had handled, personally contracts my father had signed without reading the fine print because he trusted his brother. The shell companies were receiving payments from Callaway built for work that was never performed. Phantom subcontractors. Fake invoices. At least $400,000 over 3 years, possibly more, because my father wrote, "I don't think I found all of it yet," in the margin of page 14. But it wasn't just the money. That was almost the smaller thing. Near the back of the notebook, my father had started documenting something else. Conversations he'd overheard. A phone call he had recorded on his personal cell and transcribed word for word. In that call, Ray was speaking with someone my father described only as the attorney, and they were not discussing construction contracts. They were discussing me. He'll inherit the whole thing when I'm gone, my father had written in the margin. They want the company. They need him out of the way legally before that happens. Ray is going to push for a management clause in the new incorporation documents that would block Daniel from taking operational control. I had to read that 3 times. Ray wasn't just stealing from my father. He was building a legal architecture to make sure that when my father died, the company would belong to Ray by default. He had already filed preliminary paperwork with the state to restructure Callaway Built as a limited partnership with a clause that would require board approval, a board that Ray would control before any heir could assume operational authority. My father had found this out 11 weeks before the accident on Route 9. I closed the notebook. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. I thought about the Sunday phone calls, Ray asking how I was holding up, telling me that my father would have been proud of how I was handling things. I thought about how he had walked me through the preliminary paperwork for the company transition 6 weeks after the funeral, how he had said just some standard restructuring, nothing to worry about. Your dad had started this before he passed. How I had almost signed it without reading. I had almost signed it. I put the notebook back in the box. I washed my face. And then I sat down at my kitchen table and I thought about what my father had written on the very last page of the notebook, the entry dated 3 days before he died. Daniel, if you're reading this, I didn't make it in time. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you face to face. That's the thing I wanted most. But here's what you have to do. Don't confront Ray. Don't sign anything. Don't let him know you know. Build your case first. A cornered man destroys evidence. A comfortable man gets careless. Wait. Watch. When you move, make sure there's nowhere left for him to go. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, I called in a personal day and drove 40 minutes to the county records office. Everything my father had written about the shell companies was publicly traceable if you knew where to look. It took me 4 hours and 3 cups of bad vending machine coffee, but I found 2 of the 3 companies my father had identified. Both registered in Delaware, both listing a registered agent that shared an address with a law firm in Cincinnati that my father had circled in the notebook 3 times. I photographed every document. I emailed them to a new account. I created that afternoon an account with no connection to my name. That evening, Claire came over. She brought dinner, something from the Thai place we liked, and she sat across from me and asked how I was doing in that careful way she had. The way that I had always found comforting, and now, for the first time, noticed as something slightly practiced. I told her I was fine. Just a hard week. Missing my father. She nodded. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her eyes went to my laptop, sitting closed on the counter, and then came back to me. It was a fast look, the kind you aren't supposed to notice. I noticed. I thought about the notebook. The people you'd want to tell are the people you can't trust yet. I said nothing. I smiled. I said the food was great. After she left, I sat with that look for a long time. Claire had met my uncle at my father's funeral. They had spoken for a while near the back of the reception, long enough that I had noticed and thought nothing of it. She had been dating me for 14 months. She knew my login passwords for our shared streaming accounts. She had a key to my apartment. I pulled up the notebook again and found a small notation near the middle, almost an afterthought in the margin. Someone has been accessing Tom's files on the company server remotely. IT flagged an unfamiliar device. Columbus IP address. He had written nothing more about it. But he had underlined it twice. Claire lived in Columbus. I did not change my passwords that night. I did not mention it. What I did was create a honeypot, a fake document folder on my laptop labeled Callaway Legal Private, filled with plausible-looking but completely meaningless paperwork. I drafted myself. Then I set up a notification that would ping my new email account if anyone accessed that folder remotely. 3 nights later, at 12:40 a.m., my phone buzzed. Someone had opened the folder. I forwarded the access log to my new email account, then sat in the dark feeling something that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite anger. It was more like the moment in winter when you realize the ice you're standing on has been thin the whole time, and you just never look down. I called Frank Hargrove the next morning. I've been going through the notebook, I told him. I figured you would be, he said. He mentions a recorded phone call. The one with the attorney. Do you have it? There was a pause. Your father gave me a copy. Along with about 60 pages of additional documentation he didn't fit in the notebook. I've been holding it pending your decision. My decision about what? About whether you want to handle this civilly or criminally. There's enough for both. He paused again. There may also be a third option, depending on some things I'm not able to discuss on an unsecured line. I told him I wanted to meet in person. We arranged a time for the following week, a diner in a town neither of us lived in. In the meantime, I kept my routine. Sunday call to my uncle. Hey, Ray. Yeah, doing okay. Just keeping busy. You? Dinners with Claire. Normal. Steady. My father's voice in the back of my head every time I wanted to say something. A comfortable man gets careless. Ray got careless. He called me on a Thursday afternoon and said he needed me to come in and sign the new partnership documents. He said it was a formality. He said the company attorney had flagged it as overdue. He used the word routine 4 times in 3 minutes. I told him I'd been meaning to sit down with my own attorney first, just to make sure I understood everything. I said I was sure it was all fine, but I wanted to be thorough. My father always said read everything twice, I told him. You know how he was. There was a silence on the line that lasted less than a second but contained an entire conversation. Of course, Ray said. Absolutely. Take your time. After we hung up, I sat in my car in a parking lot and thought about the fact that my father had been right about everything, and that I had spent 4 months grieving a man whose murder, and I was now using that word, at least in my own head, had been dressed up as an accident, while his killer had been coming to my apartment for Sunday dinners and asking me how I was holding up. I met with Hargrove the following Tuesday. He was a compact man in his late 60s, gray suit, coffee already ordered. He slid a manila envelope across the table before I had fully sat down. Inside were 61 pages. Account statements, wire transfer records, screenshots of internal company communications. A copy of the recording my father had made of Ray and the attorney, a man named Prescott, from the Cincinnati firm, discussing the partnership restructuring and what Prescott called the timeline for the older brother's exit from operational involvement. They had not said the word accident. They had not needed to. There was also a photograph. My father. Taken recently enough that he was wearing the jacket I had seen him in at Thanksgiving. He was standing outside what looked like a government building. He was not alone. He was standing next to a woman in a dark blazer who Hargrove, without looking at the photo, told me was a federal investigator with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. The accident on Route 9 was staged, Hargrove said. Your father cooperated with federal investigators to arrange his own disappearance. There was a real crash. The other driver was an associate of the federal task force. Your father walked away from the scene and into protective custody. I looked at the photograph for a long time. He's alive, I said. As of 3 weeks ago, yes. Why didn't he come to me? Hargrove wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. Because Ray has been watching you since the funeral. Your apartment, your phone, through your girlfriend. Your father knew that if he made any direct contact, it would expose the federal operation and put you in danger. He met my eyes. He also knew that if you learned the truth too early, you'd confront Ray. And he knew you well enough to know you wouldn't be able to help it. I thought about the notebook again. A cornered man destroys evidence. My father had known me my whole life. He knew exactly what I would want to do and exactly why I couldn't do it yet. What's the third option? I asked. The one you mentioned on the phone. Hargrove reached into his jacket and set a small folded note on the table. Your father wanted you to have that when you were ready. I unfolded it. 6 words in my father's handwriting. That familiar too large print. The lumber yard. Saturday. Come alone. I drove to the lumber yard on Saturday morning. It was a place we had gone constantly when I was growing up. My father would bring me along when he was sourcing materials, and I would walk the long rows of stacked timber pretending I was in a forest. I hadn't been there in 10 years. I parked and sat in my car for 5 minutes, watching. Nothing unusual. Then a truck pulled alongside me, windows tinted, engine cutting off. The door opened. My father stepped out. He looked thinner. He had a beard he'd never had before, close cropped. And there were more lines around his eyes than I remembered. But when he looked at me, his face did the thing it always did, that particular rearrangement of expression that had meant there you are since I was 6 years old. I got out of the car. I didn't say anything for a moment. Neither did he. I know, he said finally. I know. We sat in the bed of the truck for 2 hours. He explained everything. The federal investigation had been ongoing for 18 months before his disappearance. Ray had connections to a network of fraudulent contractors across 3 states that the Financial Crimes Unit had been building a case against. My father had become the key witness. When he realized that Ray had figured out he was cooperating, and when 2 of the federal agents on the case turned up with unexplained case file leaks, the decision was made to stage his death and pull him into protective custody until the case could be secured. The operation had collapsed 3 months ago when one of Ray's associates had identified an agent. My father had gone dark. He had been moving between locations with help from a single contact in the federal system. They're almost ready to move, he told me. Ray, Prescott, 4 others. But they need the documentation from inside the company, the real originals, not the copies to make the criminal case airtight. He looked at me steadily. The originals are in my desk at Callaway Built. In the false bottom of the center drawer. Ray never found them because he didn't know the desk was mine before it was the company's. I built it myself. You need me to get them. I need you to get them before Ray moves the partnership paperwork through and restructures the company in a way that buries the evidence under a new corporate entity. He put his hand on my shoulder. You've been building your own case. I know you have. I raised you. I almost smiled at that. He told me what to do with the documents once I had them. He gave me a contact at the federal task force, a woman named Agent Delgado, direct number, not the main line. He told me the timeline. He told me Claire was not in danger of prosecution. She had been feeding Ray information, but she hadn't known the full scope of it, and the federal case wasn't focused on her. That was his assessment. He said I could do with that what I felt was right. What if something goes wrong? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. Then you have the notebook and the 60 pages from Hargrove and your own documentation and it'll still be enough. He paused. But nothing's going wrong. I didn't come this far to miss the ending. We said goodbye in the parking lot of a lumber yard on a Saturday morning, standing between rows of stacked cedar with the smell of sawdust in the air, and it was the strangest and most complete moment of my life. My father who was not dead. My father who had spent the better part of a year as a ghost to protect a case and, though he would not have said this, to protect me, he got in the truck. I watched it go. Then I drove to Callaway Built. It was a Saturday so the office was empty. I still had my keys. My father had never revoked them after the funeral, and Ray had apparently never thought to. I went in through the side entrance, walked past the drafting tables and the wall of project photos and the framed newspaper article about a community center my father had built in 2009, and I went to my father's office. Still his name on the door, 4 months after his death. Ray hadn't changed it, and maybe that was ego and maybe it was something else, and I opened the center desk drawer and found the false bottom exactly where he had described it. Inside was a manila folder. 30 pages, original documents, signatures, account numbers, wire transfer authorizations. The kind of paperwork that ends careers and starts prosecutions. I photographed every page with my phone as a backup. Then I took the originals and I drove to a FedEx location and overnighted them to Agent Delgado at the address my father had given me. Then I drove home and I called Claire. She answered on the second ring, bright, normal, the voice I had known for 14 months. Hey, can you come over tonight? I said. I want to talk. She came. She sat across from me on the couch with a glass of wine, and she looked at me with something that was trying very hard to be openness, and I thought about 14 months and a key to my apartment and every conversation she had relayed to my uncle, and I felt, more than anything, an immense and quiet tiredness. I turned my laptop to face her. On the screen was the access log from the night someone had opened my honeypot folder. Her IP address, her device name, 12:40 a.m. She looked at it for a long time. She set down her wine. How long have you known? She asked. Long enough, I said. I'm not going to ask you what Ray paid you or what he told you about me or why you said yes. I don't think I want those answers right now. I looked at her steadily. I want you to take your key off the table and I want you to leave, and I want you to understand that the federal case being built right now does not currently include you by name, and whether that changes is not my decision. She opened her mouth and then she closed it. She put the key on the coffee table. She picked up her bag. At the door, she paused and said, I didn't know he was your father when I... Good night, I said. The door closed. 3 weeks later, federal agents arrested my Uncle Raymond at his home at 6:15 in the morning. They arrested Prescott at his Cincinnati office at 6:30. 2 associates in Cleveland were taken in simultaneously. The charges included wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, financial elder abuse, and in my uncle's case, an additional count related to the staging of a fatal accident that was now being reclassified as conspiracy to commit murder, because the intent had been that my father would not survive. Route 9, the contact had miscalculated, or lost nerve, and my father had walked away from a crash that was supposed to kill him. I read about the arrests on my phone sitting in my car outside a coffee shop. I read the same paragraph 4 times. Then I got out and went inside and ordered a large coffee and sat by the window and watched the street. That night I called Hargrove. It's done, I said. It's done, he agreed. I asked if my father was safe. He said that when a federal case closes and the subjects are in custody, the need for witness protection dissolves. He said that the process of reestablishing a legal identity takes time and that I should be patient. He said he thought I'd be hearing something soon. 2 weeks later, a postcard arrived at my apartment. No return address, postmarked from a town in Montana I had never heard of. On the front was a photograph of a lake, pine trees, the specific quality of western morning light that makes everything look like the world just started. On the back, in my father's handwriting, 2 sentences. The fish in this state don't know how good they have it. Working on it more soon. That was it. No name. No explanation needed. I put the postcard on my kitchen counter, and I looked at it for a long time. My father had coached my little league team badly and made the world's worst chili and laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them. He had also, in the last year of his supposed life, built a meticulous case against his own brother, cooperated with federal investigators, staged his own death to protect an operation and, along the way, protect me. He had written 60 pages of documentation by hand in a black notebook and trusted a private investigator he barely knew and found a way to leave me a lumber yard and a Saturday morning and his hand on my shoulder. He had done all of it quietly, without asking for recognition, the way he had always done the things that mattered most. Some men build houses. My father had dismantled the thing, trying to take everything we had, brick by brick, from the inside. And he had survived it, and somewhere in Montana the fish didn't know how good they had it, and I was still here to know the difference. That was enough. For now, it was more than enough.